Why not just say you were the one that got away? Oh, am I live? Where is it streaming from? Okay. I didn't. Alright. So, I've finally decided to read this after, like, spending lots of time just thinking about it. I have decided to read In Another Life. So, In Another Life, in case you haven't heard, is very, very sad. I'm gonna add some. I'm gonna add a trigger warning. Oh, great. There's at least death. I'm gonna pin that. Pin message, okay. So, that's fun. I'm scared. I've seen... Alright. Let's do this. It had been some time since Akashi set foot into that hospital. It was a dreary place for him, a place he was not fond of, but a place he was obligated to visit. Akashi's parents were intent on having him intern in a hospital nearby so he could stockpile more things that would look good on his resume for future purposes. Oftentimes, however, Akashi would disagree with his parents, unhappy with the suggestions they'd given him, but ultimately they would urge him to carry out the task that had been pushed on him, and one way or another he'd do it. Asking around here or there, the male put little to no effort in finding out where he could go sign up for what. He didn't care, nor did he think that he would care in the near future. Akashi was unhappy with where he was, unhappy with what it was that he was doing. He was wasting time, asking for something that he did not want in the least. Pointing a finger down the hall, a small assistant nurse directed Akashi to a different desk, one where he would be able to find more information on the subject. Blatantly he thanked her and continued on his way, passing by several rooms as he did so. So I'm just going to say right here and now, I can't read out loud very well, so feel free to leave at any time, please. His eyes were set forward. He didn't look into any of the rooms. He didn't want to. It would hurt if he did. Akashi closed his eyes and sighed, swaying absent-mindedly in his step, opening his eyes in time to swiftly avoid colliding with someone. A doctor. No, just another person. He circled around the male, apologizing flatly before he continued. It's all right, could be heard from behind him, but as soon as it faded, But it faded as soon... Hey, the internet knows that I can't read. But it soon faded as Akashi continued forward. Do I really want to do this? His eyes stared forward, uninterested in the information desk several meters from him. No, I really don't. Standing still, Akashi remained in place for quite some time, his legs refusing to carry him further. People walked by him, around him, up and down the halls, to and fro, but no one seemed to notice him. He stood there, hesitant, uninterested, indifferent, unfeeling. He remained in place silently. No one was bothered by him, so there he stood. He brought a hand up to push his black hair, and slowly his head fell forward. Akashi stared at his shoes. What am I doing? The thought rattled his mind. Why am I even here? Another person walked by at a gradual pace at first, then slowed progressively as they drew near. Their walking then slowed to a halt, and it was then that Akashi became aware of the new individual who'd invaded his personal space. From his peripheral, Akashi could see their hand reaching out to him. He withdrew and looked up. Oh, you can move. He smiled in Akashi's direction, bright yellow eyes catching his own. It had been the same guy he'd almost bumped into. Perhaps he'd remained in the hall and watched as Akashi had gone from a brisk walk to a sudden stop. He understood how that would be alarming to some people. Is there something wrong with me standing here? Akashi asked sincerely. No, I don't think so. He brought his hand down to his side. Why did you stop so suddenly? Are you alright? I'm fine. I was just thinking. Of what? A question asker. How thrilling. Of this hospital. I've realized I don't want to come here anymore. The male who stood across from Akashi shifted his weight to one leg. Were you sick? Are you checking it out? Are you checking out? Akashi stared through the stranger. No, I'm not sick, but this place makes me feel like I am. His answer was cold, but it didn't seem to cut through the other's pleasant mood. I feel the same about this place, honestly. He paused. So you must be leaving soon, then. Yeah. Akashi shifted, leaning in the direction of where he'd come from. He had no interest in staying where he was. His only intention was leaving. He figured he would tell his parents that the people in the hospital were too occupied with everything else to tend to him. He started on his way without so much as a second glance in the other's direction. Goodbye. Hey, hey! Akashi turned his head. What? That sounded so rude. What's your name? Why did he want to know his name? When would he ever use it again? The stranger could have been a patient at the hospital for all Akashi knew, and the last thing he needed was a sickly acquaintance to add to his already short list of friends. You don't need to know. The male from across did well hiding the look of offense that almost surfaced upon his face. I understand, but for what it's worth, my name is Bokuto. Akashi cast a weary look in Bokuto's direction, gave a nod, and continued on his way until he was out of the building. 2 weeks had passed since Akashi's last visit, and to his dismay, he found himself on the same aimless path back to the same dreaded hospital. He couldn't stand his parents' persistent natures, but he was somewhat relieved to be out of the house, to say the least. Here we go again. Akashi entered the building and greeted the woman at the front desk, as always. He wasted no time ascending the steps needed to get to the part of the hospital where he'd almost reached all that time ago. In minutes, the information desk was in his sights, and for the first time in forever, he'd actually gone to it. He spoke with a small woman there. After several minutes had passed, Akashi backed away from the desk, signed some sheets of paper in hand. He started down the hall, sighing heavily and intent on rushing home. Hey! Hey, it's you! The familiar voice made Akashi's throat tighten. Another sigh was forced out, even heavier this time. He turned around. Bokuto. Apathy grinned. He grinned from ear to ear. Don't call me that. Akashi stuffed the sheets into his bag. I thought you said you weren't ever going to set foot in here again. There was something strange about the excitement in his tone. I didn't exactly say that. But it was implied. Akashi squinted. Yes, it was implied. Bokuto's smile never left his face, his tired eyelids contradicting his facial expressions. Why must I always run into the strange ones? So what brings you here again? I could ask you the same thing. Akashi's lips screwed to the side. Oh, it's so long. Oh, is this originally on, oh, I hope this was our grab of our own. What's this mean? What are the numbers? Okay. Oh, comments. Thick white eyebrows raised above yellow hues. I'm supposed to be here, actually. Akashi yawned. Intern? No, patience. Patience. No, patient. His smile was unnerving. Silently, the dark-haired male frowned. I've been insensitive. A laugh bubbled out from Bokuto. No, you haven't. Don't worry about it. Though he dressed in normal, casual clothing, upon further examination, there was indeed something sickly about him. He was paler than others who walked along the halls, and soft dark circles sat under his eyes. Akashi made sure not to stare. I know you weren't going to ask, so I'll let you know. From what I've heard, the doctors say that whatever I have is called FFI? Bokuto folded his arms. He held an air around him as if he were having a normal conversation about the weather. Fatal familial insomnia, if I remember correctly. A cold shiver curled up Akashi's spine. He'd never heard of that disease before. It worried him enough to get the words out of him. I don't think I want to ask about the symptoms of this illness. Well, even if you wanted to, I wouldn't have an answer for you. Another laugh. All I can say is that sleeping doesn't come as easily as it used to. What normally would have pained someone to say, he delivered with ease, with that same grin to boot. Akashi couldn't help but smile back, his lips barely twitching. He stared in Bokuto's direction, at him this time. Are you here every day? Of course. Been here for about 4 weeks now, he blinked sheepishly. I see. Akashi nodded once. No words were exchanged for a moment, and soon the short amount of silence had become awkward. Well, I'll be going now. Shut him out. Don't let him in. He's sick. 1 second. Akashi's jaw clenched. I have to go, Bokuto. He started on his way. Please don't persist. I have to add something. I'm just gonna continue adding trigger warnings as they go on. If you would please listen. His hands at his sides, Bokuto bowed. Please, it'll only take a second. Akashi was straightforward, but he wasn't heartless. He huffed out a breath and turned around. What is it? I really have to go. His eyes lighting up, Bokuto straightened his back and fished his hand into his pocket. He pulled out a phone, and to Akashi's dread, he asked for his phone number. What was he to do? What was he to say? Akashi literally found nothing special about Bokuto. Why had the sickly one suddenly taken a liking to him? Why had when he wanted nothing more to push him away, throw away the forms, and never set foot into that hospital again, but for some strange and irritating reason, Akashi found it difficult to deny Bokuto. He was trying to, he really, truly was, but he couldn't. I don't usually text, Akashi murmured. He looked down at Bokuto's phone. He couldn't look at his face. I'm often busy. Keeping in contact with me wouldn't be a good idea. He watched Bokuto's fingers curl around the phone, and his hand slowly backed away. But, Akashi, but, I thought that was Bokuto. But, but, Akashi shocked himself at that one word. He could still see Bokuto's hand, and it had frozen in place. I guess I could find some time to talk every so often. He looked up. His gaze found Bokuto's. Those yellow eyes were gleaming. He entered his number swiftly and then handed the phone to Bokuto. The name section empty. Thank you. I guess I should be more excited. Thank you. His voice was full of excitement as he proceeded to enter the new name for his contact. Akashi watched closely as Bokuto mouthed and typed the name. Aperti-kun. Bokuto was close to saving the contact before Akashi spoke up. You don't have to put that, he sighed. It's Akashi. The sky burned a strong orange glow as the sun set in the distance. Akashi sat in bed, laptop in his lap, as his fingers scrolled and typed frantically. FFI. The page loaded. Akashi went straight into reading. FFI is a very rare autosomal dominant inherited prion disease of the brain. I can't read. Akashi's eyes scanned the screen. FFI has no known cure and involves progressively worsening insomnia, which leads to hallucinations, delirium, and confusional states that like that of dementia. Thin lips pressed into an inner thinner line. His fingers remained stiff for quite some time as his eyes read the introductory paragraph over and over again. There's no known cure, huh? Akashi continued to read on. All the people who've contracted this disease will eventually die within a year or less. This part was read aloud. He rubbed his face quietly. Of course they do. Akashi leaned his head on his chin, resting in his palm. I wonder if Bokuto knows about all of this. He must have looked it up at some point, right? It was the normal thing to do, considering he was the one suffering from said disease. Insomnia. He thought back to the bags around Bokuto's eyes. All I can say is that sleeping doesn't come as easily as it used to. Akashi exhaled quickly through his nose, making a sound that was almost like a laugh. He read up on the symptoms and blinked gently, a hand over his lips. After several minutes, Akashi closed his laptop and lay back on his bed. He stared at the ceiling. Some friend I've made. There wasn't much else to say. New text message at 11:56 p.m. Hey, I hope this isn't a bad time. Akashi lifted his head from his pillow and reached out a hand to grab his phone. The bright light caused him to squint as he read the message. Quietly, he contemplated on whether to respond or not. He blinked weakly and slid his fingers down the side of his phone, a sign of weariness. He couldn't disobey. Akashi watched as the screen went to black, and then he placed the phone back on his nightstand, choosing to ignore the message. Wonderful. He couldn't sleep for about an hour after the text, but ultimately slipped off to sleep. Akashi never received another message in the remaining hour that he was awake. During the next day, Akashi decided to stay home. He sat in his room for the majority of the day and spent at least 6 hours awake until he picked up his phone in his hands again. He looked at the message Bokuto had sent him the night before. His thumb aimlessly hovered over the keyboard, thinking of what to type. Hello. Hey! I must have missed you. I must have texted you while you were asleep. Akashi was dumbfounded. He'd never received a fast response in his life. Yeah, that must have been the case. You say hey a lot, Bokuto. I know, it's kind of my thing. Akashi could feel Bokuto's enthusiasm through his text messages. He spoke to Akashi as if he hadn't had a friend in text in years. How are you today? Oh. How are you today? Well, I'm well, thank you. Just catching up on some volleyball things. Volleyball? You like volleyball too? We have to play together. Wincing a bit, Akashi squinted at his phone screen. Such an energetic texter Bokuto was. He was the kind of difficult to keep up with, and Akashi felt like this would be a long-term sort of thing. Sure. I mean, will he let you out of the hospital? I guess. I can still walk around and get where I have to go. Pretty much the only thing wrong with me is that I can't sleep. Akashi scowled. He could feel the ignorance emanating off of Bokuto's text messages. Did he really think he was admitted to a hospital just because he was having trouble sleeping? He knew full well the name of the disease he had. Then why was he so cheerful about his entire situation? Why did he lack the understanding of just how serious his condition was? Unless Bokuto was purposefully playing the fool. He must have been. Right? Akashi's grip tightened around his phone. He had to be. Then I guess I'll see you at the hospital around a week or two from now. I know a gymnasium we can go to. A week or two? Is that too long to wait? Is that too long a wait? I can probably reschedule. No, it's alright. I guess I can wait that long. I've got time. The words echoed in Akashi's head as if they'd been spoken aloud. He stared down at the screen, his brow furrowing slightly. Did Bokuto know the last lifespan of victims with this condition? Was he just playing the fool after all? Just what kind of guy was he? Indifference morphed into curiosity, and said curiosity was what drew Akashi closer to his new friend. Great, I'll see you then. Akashi! Another 2 weeks had passed since Akashi had seen Bokuto, but this time he waited outside the hospital, several meters away from the entrance. Akashi looked up from his phone and stuffed it into his jacket pocket as the energetic hospital patient made his way to the lot. In no time, Bokuto was standing in front of Akashi, eager in every way to make it to the gymnasium. I haven't set foot outside in weeks, he looked around. The day was strangely chilly, leaving it with an occasional breeze now and then, causing the browning leaves to rustle on the trees above. Those yellow eyes examined everything, adamant with taking it all in. Bokuto tucked his hand into the pocket of his hood, his shoulders hunching. A puff of smoke came from him as he exhaled. He was paler than before, and the bags under his eyes were darker. Bokuto looked exhausted beyond belief. There he stood, excited to make his way to the gymnasium. Akashi hadn't even mustered his first word before Bokuto snapped his head to the side and gave him his undivided attention. The gymnasium is about 10 minutes that way. Akashi pointed down the road. Then let's go! Bokuto power walked ahead, obligating Akashi to catch up with him in a quickened pace, whether he wanted to or not. The sounds of their sneakers squeaking against the gym floor were so memory-inducing it caused Akashi to take a moment and reminisce on the old days, as if doing so would take him back to a time when he'd play volleyball every single day after school. After a while, he'd opened his eyes and sighed, then moved across the court to the net. He brought along a volleyball of his own, in case they weren't provided with any. What used to be your position back when you would play? Akashi asked, finally pulling his hands from his hip pockets. His head was cocked back as he surveyed the gym. Akashi bounced the ball off the floor twice. Setter, you? Bokuto grinned. I was team captain, and the ace. He gave a mock swing of his arm, as if spiking. Do you think you can toss to me? Of course. Oh, that sounded way too happy. Of course. Akashi and Bokuto carried a sort of unspoken communication with each other. They had a strange relationship, to say the least. Akashi would answer his questions coldly, with little to no emotion in his... But Bokuto would cherish these answers and retort with excitement in his tone. He didn't seem to take offense easily. Bokuto was very different from Akashi, from everyone else Akashi had ever met before him. Where most people would detach themselves, Bokuto took hold and wouldn't let go, as if being as persistent as he was energetic. It was very unsettling. Akashi turned away and frowned. I wouldn't have given you my number if you weren't patient. The black-haired male bounced the ball again and walked over to the position. This is also nostalgic. Bokuto's voice was filled to the brim with excitement. He took several steps back to prepare himself for the toss. Mentally, he was more than ready to spike, but not so much physically. Bokuto missed Akashi's set 12 times. Shit. His frustration was unmasked. Please toss to me again. He threw the ball to Akashi. There is no stopping you, is there? Taking the ball in his hands, Akashi aimed for an approximate location as to where Bokuto would spike the ball. He wanted for him to spike it at least once, lest Bokuto threw a self-hate-induced panic attack. Watching as Bokuto ran forward, Akashi set the ball perfectly. It had brought him back to his high school days. Now if only the sickly one would hit it. The sound of the palm of Bokuto's hand meeting the ball sounded much like an explosion. Akashi flinched. It had been so long since he heard something so loud. It was amazing. Ha! Did you see that? Bokuto was bursting with emotion. He was ecstatic. I spiked it perfectly just now! The toss was perfect! Without hesitation, he ran across the court to retrieve the ball. Akashi knew that running probably wasn't the best thing he should have been doing, but he said nothing about it. The ball was tossed back to him, and again he got back to tossing the ball for Bokuto. After 3 sets, there was another hit, another cheer from the former ace. Akashi raised his eyebrows. Impressive. He watched the ball roll further away from them, and expected to see Bokuto trailing it, but instead saw nothing. He turned his attention back to the only other in the room. Bokuto stared off in a distance from the net, his face carrying a confused expression. After a moment, he quietly spoke. They aren't really there, are they? The words left his mouth reluctantly. Akashi glanced in the direction of where Bokuto was staring. No one. They were the only two in the gym. He dug his thumbnail into the side of his index finger and returned his gaze to Bokuto. They aren't really there. He had to force himself to say the mere 4 words. Okay. Bokuto mouthed an okay before backing up several steps. Could you please toss me some more? Oh, that scared me. Sure. Akashi nodded once, and that was all Bokuto needed to hear before he ran off to retrieve the ball. At some point during their walk home from the gym, Akashi had agreed for Bokuto to spend the night at his house. My parents are out for a month, he'd unconsciously said, causing Bokuto to go in a begging frenzy to stay over until Akashi said yes. Normally he would have been red with irritation from the sound of such irksome persistence, but the smile that would claim Bokuto's face whenever he agreed to something would make Akashi forget all about how frustrated he was. He entered his home with the Bokuto in a matter of minutes, having walked faster than usual. Out there, the sickly one trembled like a newborn animal, even with the extra jacket that Akashi had offered him. It's warm. Bokuto exhaled and shuddered once he was inside, slipping off his shoes. Akashi stepped in and turned his head. I would hope so. He moved forward. My room is this way. Bokuto followed briskly. He observed his surroundings once again, having been fascinated by the inside of someone else's home. Everything was neat and placed perfectly here and there, giving Akashi's house a warm atmosphere to it. It reminded him of his home. Bokuto nearly bumped into Akashi as he entered his room. You can sit anywhere. He climbed into the bed and folded one leg, pulling his laptop over to start it up. Is your butt alright? Bokuto pulled off Akashi's jacket. I sat anywhere. Bokuto plopped on the mattress right after these words, bumping his head against Akashi's shoulder. He recoiled with a grunt. Watch it. Akashi shifted aside to give his visitor more room. Despite this, Bokuto was still close enough for their arms to touch. Akashi sighed and lazily dragged his finger along the D-pad. Do you want to watch a movie? Bokuto curled in on himself and pushed his hands to his hood pocket. Yeah, anything is fine. His yellow eyes stared at the screen intently. Okay. Akashi opened the first movie he had in his computer's memory. He pushed the laptop away and pressed play. What's it called? Confused, Bokuto glanced over at him. Cloud Atlas. Nothing. Never mind. That was my Alexa. The word for it is, I'm gonna put it in chat. But the word for my Alexa to activate is that word. And apparently it took confused as the word that I put in chat. Some random people that end up joining is gonna be really confused as to why there's a random computer in the chat. Never mind. How long is it? About 3 hours. He kicked his legs out of bed and walked across his room to retrieve a thick blanket that sat up, bundled up in a rolling chair. He then tossed it to Bokuto once he was close enough. You've been shivering, he said. Bokuto gathered the navy blue blanket in his arms and cautiously threw it around his shoulders. It was soft. Thank you. He kept his eyes on the screen. I used to handle cold better than this. An embarrassed chuckle escaped him. Exhaling through his nostrils, Akashi reclaimed his seat in bed, crossing his legs. Things happen. Yeah. Outside, the sky above grew dark as clouds rolled in. Bokuto quieted himself, curled up, and watched on as the movie started. The sound of rain pelting hard against the window snapped Akashi back into reality. He looked around in weary haste, but calmed quickly once his memory had returned to him. He nodded off for a brief moment, with his arms crossed and his head resting on a thick bundle of pillows. With much effort, he sat up to look at Bokuto. The movie was well over 2 hours in, nearing its end, and Bokuto lay on his side, curled up and clutching the blanket with what little strength he had left. His eyes were half-lidded and glued to his screen. his face void of emotion. It almost looked as if he were asleep. Bokuto? Akashi's voice was groggy. Slowly his yellow eyes scrolled to the side to catch Akashi's gaze. He turned his head weakly, his body along with it. I'm sorry. I've watched this movie so many times I actually fell asleep. Akashi dragged a hand down to his face. Don't be sorry, Bokuto found himself smiling. It's your house. You can sleep if you want to. What if I have a visitor over? It's fine. I'm not just some visitor after all. We're friends. Bokuto's head lolled to the side, directing his attention back to the movie. You were out for about an hour. Akashi heard a sigh. Heaved a sigh. He rubbed the back of his neck. I envy you. I wish I could sleep like that again. Guilt bubbled up within Akashi's chest. He realized how rude that was, falling asleep so easily in front of a person whose biggest struggle was just that. How insensitive of me. He furrowed his brow, mentally scolding himself. Don't cry over it. Bokuto shifted easily down, sticking a leg out to kick Akashi. The movie kept me company. It's very good. Kind of confusing, but good. I'll have to watch it again. Strange. Bokuto was such a strange one. He seemed to be unfazed by many things and blatant about others, blurting sentences out that didn't seem to have much thought behind them. Akashi doubted that he'd ever have Bokuto over again, so hearing him say, I'll have to watch it another time, didn't sit too well with him. Akashi twisted his lips to the side and decided to bring up something else. Are you tired? Exhausted, Bokuto answered honestly. Close your eyes for the time being. Akashi kicked his legs out of bed with much effort and stood on his feet. I'll get us some water. He left the room quickly, leaving Bokuto by his lonesome. After several seconds, he returned to see that Bokuto had changed his position in bed entirely. He lay on his back with his head on some of Akashi's pillows. His hands rested on his stomach and the dark blanket surrounding him from behind, but slipping off just enough for his torso to be exposed. His head rested against the bed, slumped to the side, facing away from Akashi. Again, if he hadn't known any better, Akashi would have figured that Bokuto was already fast asleep. He approached the bedside silently. The room was dark, apart from the soft orange glow that his lamp gave off. He set the drinks down and shuffled into bed, as if trying not to wake the other. Lying on his back, he stared at the ceiling. No words were exchanged for what seemed forever before Akashi spoke up. Oh boy. How does it feel to not be able to sleep? Bokuto's answer was delayed. Awful. He turned his head in the opposite direction, facing Akashi now. I can barely keep my eyes open day by day, and can barely keep them closed by night. He snorted, laughter. Does it frustrate you? At first, when I didn't understand why, but I'm kind of okay with it. A hand reached to push through his own meshy locks. I kinda miss it though. Sleeping, dreaming. Akashi watched Bokuto, listening to every word he said. I used to have insane dreams too, especially before certain volleyball matches. He laughed again, louder this time. I dreamed that I messed up during a spike, and then I'd wake up fuming and would constantly tell myself that I was the best. Do you still think you're the best? Emerald eyes searched Bokuto's own for an honest answer. He sighed as a response to the grin. Yeah. Bokuto closed his eyes after that, one hand resting on the side of his head. He was obviously tired, showing signs of exhaustion with every small move he made. Akashi grew silent and knitted his fingers together on his stomach, his head relaxing into his pillow. Both of them didn't exchange any words after that, ending the conversation just as suddenly as it had started. 2 hours had passed since their last words to each other, and yet Akashi still lay awake in bed. Unknown to Bokuto, he watched him quietly through almost closed eyelids, his thick lashes being enough to hide the fact that he was still awake. Tired, but awake. Akashi couldn't sleep, but it wasn't because of his unfamiliarity with Bokuto that caused this. He couldn't sleep because of his honest fascination. Bokuto would lay still quiet for a while. Bokuto would lay still for quite a while, his head tilted to the side with one hand on his stomach and the other at his side. When he was like this, Bokuto would think that he was resting, and he would almost believe that thought until Bokuto would twitch again, his body jerking him from what little relaxation he tried to achieve. At first, Akashi thought nothing of it. Bokuto would wince and snap back to reality, the way someone would when they dreamt they were falling, but Akashi knew full well that that such a thing wasn't possible with Bokuto's condition. It made Akashi pity him, to say the least. 3 times. Bokuto jolted awake involuntarily, and 3 times he covered his eyes with his forearm and heaved a quiet sigh. Akashi refused to have reacted to those moments, hoping to spare his visitor the embarrassment of him having seen that. He intended on closing his eyes and falling asleep for real afterwards, but after having felt his mattress shake awake for the 4th time, he opened his eyes. Akashi lifted himself onto his elbows. "Bokuto," he whispered. Alarmed, he snapped around quickly. His face looked both shocked and exhausted at the same time. "Akashi, don't." His voice a mere murmur. Akashi moved closer to Bokuto and then resumed to lay down on his back. His head slightly elevated with the pillows that sat behind him. "Don't apologize." Mildly embarrassed, Bokuto looked away and rubbed his arms. "Come." Akashi beckoned for his visitor. Turning his attention to him, I scrolled and then lost where I was at. Turning his attention back to him, Bokuto met Akashi's gaze. He wore a confused expression, wondering what the other had just meant by that word. "I said come." He motioned for Bokuto to come closer. "Get over here." As Akashi said this, he held out an arm, as if readying himself for some sort of hug. Obeying with hesitance, Bokuto shifted towards Akashi and lay against him, fitting into the curve of his arm. There was no doubt that he was larger than Akashi, but that didn't stop from fitting in just right. Bokuto's head again. I am so sorry that I'm stuttering like this. Bokuto's head lay against Akashi's shoulders. Akashi's arm cautiously wrapped. Repetition of sounds. What is this? Poetry? Akashi's arm cautiously wrapped itself around Bokuto's broad shoulders. Neither of them said a word. Minutes passed, and in time Akashi could feel Bokuto relaxing against him, the signs of fatigue finally wearing him down. His head slumped against his shoulder, and both his hands rested on his stomach. He was trying so hard to fit in that small amount of sleep that would get him through the next day. Akashi wanted to help. As much as he didn't believe it, Akashi wanted so badly to help. Why? Akashi watched as one of Bokuto's hands twitched involuntarily, and to his dismay, it wouldn't stop. Slowly, he reached a hand out and closed it over the twitching one, his 4 fingers fitting into Bokuto's palm. In seconds, his hand was calm again. Akashi inhaled quietly. He watched as Bokuto's chest rose and fall with each breath that kept him alive. His breathing was controlled, much like one of a person who is actually asleep. Pursing his lips, Akashi let his head fall back onto the pillows. He turned his head to the side toward Bokuto's. He could smell his faint scent. He smelled sort of like a hospital. I don't like that smell. I don't like the smell of a hospital. It's weird. Akashi made his way to the hospital for the umpteenth time that week, his hands in his jacket pockets and his nose bearing into the burgundy knit scarf that had protected him from the chilly weather. It had been 2 months since Bokuto's visit over his home, and ever since then Akashi found that making his way to the hospital became a daily routine for him. And even if he didn't show up, he would still spend his days sending messages to Bokuto, be it text, email, or the occasional video chat. He exhaled through his nose and entered the hospital, greeted by the woman at the front desk, who now knew him by name and removed the scarf from around his neck. Akashi already knew where to go. He ascended those familiar steps, said hello to familiar faces, and ran out the familiar corner that he knew would lead him to Bokuto's room. Another breath escaped him, slow and casual, but he'd soon learn to hold his breath when he noticed another person sitting outside in the hall, several feet from the room where visitors could spend their time. Akashi eyeballed the small male for a second, knowing that he wouldn't look up to catch him, his head on the low, and his attention belonged only to the handheld system that entertained him. Normally, Akashi would have walked away in that instant in order to pay Bokuto a visit, but as he neared his room, he could hear two voices come from within. One of the voices belonged to Bokuto. The other, he had no clue. Akashi paused and gripped the strap of his bag. Hesitating, he turned, pivoting on one foot to stare back at the small one who stopped by his lonesome. Feeling that it would be rude to interrupt Bokuto's conversation with whoever the other person was, Akashi strode over to the seat and sat one chair away from the gaming stranger. Akashi tapped his fingers quietly against his pants. "Are you here to see Bokuto Kotaro?" Akashi asked in a level tone. "No, my friend is." Another spoke in a quiet voice. The other spoke in the quiet voice, low and brooding, or maybe not brooding, but more along the lines of apathetic. Apathican. The nickname popped into Akashi's head for a brief second. He wasn't too sure why. Alright, I need water really badly, so I'm gonna go fill up my water bottle. I will be right back though, so please excuse me for a second. Alright, I'm back, and then this time, I can talk. Is your friend a friend of Bokuto's? Yeah, an old friend. He pressed pause on his PSP and tapped one end against his palm. They used to play volleyball together. They go back a couple of years. Akashi leaned back and said, I see. He felt the need to keep most of his questions at bay. His company did not seem like the type to socialize so openly, so he figured simple inquiries would do just fine, especially if he kept them to a minimum. May I ask your name? Akashi took a shot at it. A small thumb rubbed at the system screen to remove the thought of smudge. He looked up, gazed at Akashi past his bleach blonde bangs, and straightened his back in the slightest way possible. Kozume Kenma. Akashi Keiji. He felt like he could enjoy Kozume's company with how his words lacked all form of emotion. It's nice to meet you, Kozume. Kenma's fine. He looked back down at the game screen. Likewise. Akashi nodded, glad to have made an acquaintance and would have relaxed into his seat if not for the sudden disembodied voice that startled him soon after Kenma's sentence. Hey Kenma, who are you talking to? As if straight from a cartoon, out popped a tall male from Bokuto's room, with stark black hair that both hung over his face and stuck out in all directions. He carried a look on his face that made him seem even more sinister than sincere, and his eyes flitted from Kenma to Akashi, then back to Kenma. This is Akashi. I just met him. His words were as straightforward as they were indifferent. Akashi? Bokuto's voice rang out from the room this time. Akashi didn't even have to know this. Oh my goodness! Akashi didn't even have to see his face to know that Bokuto was beaming. He's here? Is he here? I am. Akashi rose from his seat to enter the room, but instead found Bokuto standing at the door in seconds, his eyes wide with surprise. He was thinner than before, a large flannel shirt fitting him loosely. He had probably lost a bit over 20 pounds in the month that passed. Akashi frowned. Get back into bed. You shouldn't be. Bokuto didn't allow him to finish his sentence as he embraced Akashi suddenly. I didn't think you were going to make it today. Though he'd gotten thinner, his arms still had some power to them. He squeezed Akashi, mashing him closer till he could barely breathe. Akashi's eyebrows knit together. I told you I would. He all but murmured against Bokuto's shoulder. What's this? The taller dark-haired male gestured to them. I come to visit and I'm barely paid attention to, but when he comes along, he's given the whole package. Bokuto pulled away to face his smirking friend. Relax, he said, then turned his attention to Akashi. This is Kuroo, a nice friend of mine. He cocked his head to the side. Nice to meet you, Akashi. I've heard a lot about you in the short hour I've been here. Nodding once, Akashi acknowledged Kuroo's word, but did not know how to respond to them. All he had to offer was the pleasure is mine. Before moving forward to try and usher Bokuto back into his room. Hey! Bokuto resisted, standing firm in place. We were actually just talking about stepping outside. Well, I brought it up just as a suggestion, but then he got really excited. Kuroo scratched the back of his head, so we were all going to step outside for a minute or two in order to get this owl to shut up. I've been cooped up in this place for too long and haven't gone outside in days. The discomfort could be heard in Bokuto's voice. If there was one thing that Akashi had learned about Bokuto in the little time he'd known him, was that he wasn't too fond of staying locked up indoors. Maybe taking him outside for a while would do him some good. Akashi liked that all. Let's go then, to the garden out in the back. Everyone came to an unspoken agreement after the one sentence. Kuroo started down the hall, Bokuto trailing after him. Akashi followed, knowing that Kenma was nearby. As he walked, he stared at the backs of the two men in front of him. They seemed to be the same height, but Akashi couldn't help but realize Bokuto looked just a bit smaller. A mere 2 minutes had turned into 2 hours. Akashi shared a bench with Kenma. Both of them had sat down long ago, leaving Bokuto and Kuroo to mind their own business as they wandered about, waved their arms around in their animated way of speaking. He found it strange how Bokuto was the one walking around when he was the sick one out of the lot. He furrowed his brow and exhaled heavily, his eyes looking down. He stared at his knees intensely before Kenma spoke up. You don't like to see him like that, do you? Akashi lifted his head and looked to his side. He eyed the blonde one for quite a while. Kenma didn't give him a chance to respond. I don't like to see him like that either. It's why I didn't want to come along, but Kuroo insisted. Kenma's uncertain tone contradicted his words, but something told Akashi that he meant everything he was saying. Were you ever friends with Bokuto? Akashi lifted his head in subtle interest. More like acquaintances. Our teams would face each other often, and whenever we did, Kuroo and Bokuto would meet up afterwards and spend time together. I'm usually around Kuroo, so... He shrugged with little energy. I sort of got to know him through Kuroo's company. He's an okay guy. Loud, though. Bokuto's disembodied laughter rang through the garden as if to prove Kenma right. Akashi almost smiled. So, how are you taking all of this, if I may ask? I'm... Kema's lips puckered in thought. I'm taking it well, or at least I think I am. I'm trying to detach myself. It's another reason I didn't want to pay Bokuto any visits. He looked down, his hair hanging over his face. There's something about Bokuto that doesn't sit well with me. Confused and mildly shocked, Akashi made a face. Nothing. Never mind. I'm not talking to you, Alexa. Akashi made a face. Is there something wrong with him? Has he ever done anything bad? Not to my knowledge, but even if he has, that's not what I meant. Kemna rubbed his nose with his sleeves. Doesn't matter if you've never met Bokuto before, if you haven't seen him in 10 days, or 10 weeks, or 10 months, or 10 years. If you ever interact with him, even in the slightest, you'll be reminded of just how good a person he really is. Akashi stared at Kenma, speechless. He's genuine, kind, and at times infantile, but that's what makes him so likable, I suppose. He drags you back in. He praises others while shouting that he's the best at everything he does. It's ridiculous. Looking away slowly, Akashi watched as Kuroo and Bokuto reappeared in the distance. They were still wrapped up in whatever conversation they were having. Kuroo looks happy now, but he wasn't then. Kema almost murmured the words. Akashi turned to catch a glimpse of him, but he stared off in the distance, his eyes not focusing on anything particular. Blinking, Akashi turned his direction back to Kuroo and Bokuto. This is great. "5 weeks ago, he was in shambles. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He only accepted my company. I was the only one willing to give it to him. He continued to stare on as he talked. That was when he learned about the disease. This entire past month uh, hasn't been any different for him, though. He almost didn't want to come today either. No one likes to find out that someone they care about is sick, not just diagnosed with a disease that can't be cured." Bokuto and Kuroo continued to talk animatedly, both of them out of earshot. Bokuto's starting to look less and less like his old self, too. He used to be thicker. He used to be bigger than Kuroo, but now he's the one who's smaller. Kuroo's the bigger one. Kuroo's the heavier one. It doesn't make any sense. Pursing his lips into a thin line, Akashi looked down and noticed that Kenma had laced his fingers together. He pulled and tugged at them restlessly. His hands showed what his face dared not. Akashi figured it was safe to say that Bokuto had already begun to pull Kenma back in. It was an awful thing to do, but Akashi knew full well that none of it was intentional on Bokuto's part. All he had to do was talk to someone, and in an instant they would be involved in Bokuto's lively shenanigans once again. Akashi knew this. The same thing happened to him some 2.5 months ago. If he had not known that sending simple text messages would have turned into daily hospital visits, then he never would have handed over his cell number. This wasn't what he wanted. He wanted healthy friends that he could talk to on a regular basis, not one sick friend who he'd have to invest personal emotional time into. Akashi swallowed thickly and crossed his hands, rubbing one thumb at the other. He stared at Bokuto and found it difficult to look away. With a heavy heart, he spoke. "I wish I never met him." A cool breeze passed through the garden just then, and at a distance, Bokuto held on tight to the burgundy knit scarf around his neck to keep warm. Water. In time, Kuroo and Kema found that it was time for them to make their way back home. Kuroo bid Bokuto farewell for the time being, while Kema made his way downstairs to exit the building. He didn't seem like one to say goodbye, or hello for that matter, so both Akashi and Bokuto didn't pay any mind to it. Kuroo was finally left the room after 4 minutes or so, having forgotten that he was supposed to leave in the first place. He waved and jogged out, knowing that if he didn't hurry, he'd have to spend several more minutes trying to catch up to a wandering Kenma. Standing at the side of Bokuto's bed, Akashi glanced to open the door that led to a hallway. "Your friend is a lot like you." "Anything but," Bokuto retorted, sitting upright in bed. "He's a bit more of, well, an ass, to say the least." He chuckled and rubbed at his face wearily. I'm sorry, I felt that was necessary. The sound of Bokuto's laughter caused Akashi to turn his head back to him. It was a reaction that Akashi wasn't expecting in the least, but he played off his surprise and only managed on I see. Bokuto gazed at Akashi, almost in wonder. Why are you standing? Take a seat. He pat the empty space next to him animatedly. No, it's alright. I was actually thinking of taking my leave soon as well. What? Why? The disappointment in his voice was clear. You've only been here for like 30 minutes. Akashi scratched his head. It's been over 3 hours, actually. That's the same thing! Bokuto moved closer to where Akashi was standing, all the while still sitting in his bed. I spoke to Kuroo most of the time, so it doesn't count. That's not how time works, hon. I'm gonna read one more chapter. And then I'm gonna have to be done. There we go. What doesn't? Akashi took an unnoticeable step back. For 3 hours! He was getting frustrated. I'm very bad at measuring time now, too, in case you haven't noticed. 3 hours feels like 7 hours sometimes, but 3 hours can also feel like 7 minutes. I might not be as sharp as I used to, but the whole time flies when you're having fun rule still applies to me, even today. So, 3 hours is nothing, Akashi muttered. Exactly! Bokuto's eyes lit up again. Akashi, avoiding looking into them. I understand, but I still have to go. He avoided looking at Bokuto altogether. I would stay if it were up to me. I've got something I need to take care of, but I'll be sure to visit you tomorrow. Bokuto didn't make a sound. He pressed his lips into a thin line and fell backwards onto his bed. He probably had 1,000 things to say, but he kept them all at bay and instead rolled onto his side facing away from Akashi. He was shocked. Akashi never knew that Bokuto was one to suddenly sulk on a dime. And we've entered emo mode. Okay. He looked around and frowned and figured it would be best to take his leave. I'll see you tomorrow. Do you want your scarf back? The question came out of the blue. Despite him being the one who asked, Bokuto held onto it tightly. Akashi, no! Akashi watched him and zipped up his jacket. Yeah, I do. In dismay, Bokuto sat up and slowly reached around his neck to pull off the warm piece of cloth. He took his time and he thought of removing it, killing. He took his time and thought of removing it, killing it faster than the disease itself. But I also want you to hold on to it. The words had come as such a shock to Bokuto. He paused and looked at Akashi. His hands tensed, relaxed, and rested against his neck. You do? Yes. Akashi managed the faintest of smiles. Please hold on to it, Bokuto. At that moment, he turned away and walked off, feeling he wouldn't be able to leave if he lasted one more second in the room. Akashi woke with a start that same night, his strangled shouts having pulled him from his sleep. He flinched hard and sat up quickly, closing his hand over his mouth to subdue the almost hysteric sounds that came from him. His breathing was heavy, his heart rate quicker than usual. Akashi could feel his heart pounding in his throat, making it difficult to swallow. Okay. Shit. Shit. That had been the 5th time that month where Akashi had to tear himself out of another nightmare. They made him feel nauseous to a point where he had to sit up in bed, swallow deep, slow breaths in order to cool himself down. And he did just that, reaching his hands up to rub at his eyes before taking a tense look around his room. Exhaling heavily, Akashi turned to look out to the nearest bed. His phone was there. Hesitating for only a second, he reached his hand out and took the device into his hands. When the screen lit up, a text message from Bokuto waited there for him. Sleep well, Akashi. It had been sent 2 hours ago. Akashi swiped and unlocked his phone with trembling hands. From Akashi, sent at 2:40 a.m. 2:47 a.m. That is. Are you there, Bokuto? Yeah, Akashi, I thought you fell asleep. Akashi had to wait almost a minute for Bokuto's response. It was the longest minute he'd ever been forced to sit through. Okay. So, I hate it. but I have to take a break now. Yeah, I have to, I'll come back either Friday or Saturday. I can't any other day because school and sleep and stuff like that. But I will come back within the week. Within the next week.
Hi.
What?
Will you come gather the dishes out of my room and take them down?
Yeah, one sec. So yeah, in about a week, I will come and I will stream again. And I will read more. Probably not the rest, because this is very long, but I will read more of In Another Life, and I will probably cry. But, anyways, I hope you liked my stream. I can't read, but thank you to that one concurrent viewer throughout the whole thing. That was awesome of you to stay. Thanks. Can I see who that is? I can't. Okay. Well, thanks anyway. Goodbye.